Well, good morning. I'm Rob Jennett. I'm the City Director for Birmingham for Young Business Leaders, and I'm so glad you all have come this morning. Appreciate your prayers. One of our panelists is possibly en route. We have not been able to reach him. I'm confident that the other two panelists have more than enough to share, so just the same, please be praying for David Purcell, just to make sure he's safe and hopefully on his way here. Now, I've been looking forward to this summer series and this topic of learning leadership because I really want to become a better leader. I want to grow in my leadership. And one of our panelists here this morning has had a remarkable effect on me personally because in his book, I read a significant concept, just the idea that leadership is something that can be learned. I think I had grown up with the idea, and maybe some of you can relate, that leadership was just sort of a set of chromosomes, genetic traits that some people possessed and other people didn't. And one of the main arguments of his book, The Leadership Dynamic, was the fact that leadership is a set of skills that can be applied to almost an infinite number of situations and that need to be applied to almost an infinite number of situations that we can learn and grow and develop in. I was sharing the topic for this summer series with a friend here in town, and he shared a story with me that I've heard in a couple of different variations. But apparently there was a man touring the Scottish Highlands, and he was in a village looking at the buildings, and he asked his tour guide, he said, "Were there any great men born here?" And the tour guide looked at him and said, "Oh, no, sir, only babies." And that's such an important concept for us. We are not born leaders or great men. We have to develop and grow in our skills throughout life. And so one other thing I'd say, for those of you who feel like I'm more at the mentoring stage of my life, I would say this. There's a quote I heard this just the past couple months from my friend Mike Flink at Ministry Ventures, and I don't know where he got it from, but the statement is, there is no success without succession. As you think about your life, this idea of if you have been successful in your life, what are you doing to pass that on to someone else who will carry on after you're gone? So for those of you beginning your careers, I pray that you are passionate about learning well and not giving up just when you find that leadership is hard, but that you really lean in to the idea of learning leadership. And for those of you that are mentoring, I pray that this will give you some new fire and encouragement to invest in others and to pour into others. So because leadership is so crucial, these panels are designed to try to help you, almost give you a bite-sized mentoring session with someone that we think has a lot to share. So our two panelists that we have this morning, we have Dr. Harry Reeder, who's the senior pastor of Briarwood and the author of numerous books, one of which is The Leadership Dynamic, one of the best books on leadership that I've ever read. And then we have Keith Richards, who is the founder of Tzatziki's Restaurants. Started out with one restaurant 20 years ago, mortgaged his house to start that restaurant at the Colonnade that probably half the people in this room have eaten at some point. And now there are 85 stores in 17 states. So we're excited to have them. Would you please join me in welcoming them to our panel? Yeah, I think on the website it didn't totally communicate which Keith Richards. So if you guys were looking for the Rolling Stones singer, I'm really sorry.
Totally disappointed. We had never mind. Can't say those words in here, but fire and ice, I guess.
Well, we're so glad you guys are here. I guess maybe the first thing to start with is if you guys would maybe just tell us a little bit about yourselves and help us to get to know you and a little bit of your journey here this morning.
You know, when you got introduced, my wife who was with us, because we're on our way out of town, as soon as you got introduced, the founder and CEO of Tzatziki's, first amen I've heard her say in a long time. We make big use of your product. I've contributed much to your to your future retirement.
I told him earlier, keep coming, please, please. I've got 4 kids.
So anyway, I was born at an early age in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my father was in minor league baseball, so that meant we lived all over. I went to 11 schools in 12 years. Was raised in a Christian home, but went the other direction. But God very graciously brought me to himself after I had made the dean's list my sophomore year at East Carolina. Unfortunately, it was the wrong dean. It was the dean of students, and who informed me that I had succeeded in flunking out and dismissed from the baseball team and everything else. So I was on my way to the Marine Corps. The Lord intervened through his providence. I came to saving faith in Christ. And one of his interventions was my wife and my future wife. And we did get married, and then I put her through school and went back to East Carolina. Was going to finish at East Carolina and move on into law, either law enforcement or major in history and criminology. But the Lord called me to the ministry, and so I left East Carolina and went to Covenant College, and then finished there in Westminster Seminary. And the Lord led me into the Presbyterian Church in America. I went to Miami, Florida, pastored my first congregation. It was 50 people. Average age was 69. The lady that had figured that out had been 59 for about 25 years. So that was a suspect. That was a suspect figure. One good flu season, I was out of a church. Serious. I had a church. Nobody in my church bought green bananas. They might not be around that long. And so anyway, but the Lord blessed, and I had the great privilege of pastoring a multiracial, multi-ethnic church in Miami, and loved it. You know, I'm there in January. It's 82 degrees. I'm in my shorts playing golf. I said, I think the Lord's called me here. And but then the Lord called me, and a guy named Frank Barker said, well, Harry, I think the Lord might be calling you to go plant a church in a city where we don't have a church. And so that's actually what happened. I went back to my hometown, planted a church, and that planted a presbytery, and we had a great time there for 17 years. And then I got another phone call from a guy named Frank Barker, and he said that relates to what I'm about to be asked about here. And he said, well, Harry, I'd like for you to pray about me giving your name to the pulpit committee. And I said, no, sir. And he said, well, you just need to pray about it. I said, no, sir, I'm not going to pray about it. And he said, you're not going to pray about it? And I said, no, I'm not going to pray about it. Last time you asked me to pray about it, I ended up moving. And this time, if I end up moving, I go to Birmingham. If I'm not mistaken, you've been there 40 years. You are a legend, and that's Alabama. And for me to go there, I would follow a 40-year legend. And I've already seen what people in Alabama do to people that follow legends. So I'm not really interested in going down there for a train wreck. And he said, well, you just need to pray about it. So I said no 7 times and then prayed about it. And then here I am in 1999 with the great privilege of serving a wonderful church with wonderful leaders. And now an extraordinary opportunity to talk to you. And I'll try to say what my wife wrote out for me to say.
All right, so I was born in Birmingham. Actually born in, I guess you call it Inslee. It's Central Park. Yeah, there you go. Go Rebels. And kind of I guess a modest family. My dad was a lineman for South Central Bell, and grew up, going to church every Sunday night. We didn't have Wednesday night service, but if we did, I'm sure I would have gone to that. Not a lot going on other than playing baseball. That's pretty much all we did. Stayed at the ballpark every night, and that's probably why I don't go to the ballpark now, because I said I can't spend the rest of my life at a ballpark. I'm not going to do that. So grew up kind of, I was a pretty good student. Wasn't the smartest in the class, wasn't the dumbest. Kind of fell in love with the restaurant business at 15. my first job was at Baskin Robbins, and my first day of work was on a Sunday, which my mom said, you cannot do. And I said, it's my first job, I've got to go work. I want to try work out. So I went to my first day was on a Sunday. That lasted 2.5 hours. I was fired that day. So my church was 3 blocks. The job I had was in 5 Points West in Inslee, and my house was in Central Park, more or less in Green Acres. So I had to I was going to walk to church, miss 45 minutes, or walk home. And the devil pulled me back to the house. So instead of walking 5 minutes, ride home from church, I walked. It seemed like 10 hours, but it was only like an hour. Got home and realized that everybody in my neighborhood was at church, so I sat on the front porch for about an hour contemplating why I got fired. I just took a guy's order wrong. Why did I get fired? So I thought, okay, now it's time for baseball. Let's do something else. So anyway, the next week I was bagging groceries, and it kind of, being in where you deal with people, kind of brought the Keith Richards out. I wasn't really vocal as a child. I'm still trying not to be vocal today. Things have changed, but so my work career ended there, going to school, played tennis at Jeff State. I wasn't a good student. We have something in common. So left there and got into what we call the restaurant business. And at 18, my sister had put an application in at Kmart cafeteria. And a lot of the people I tell the story to, like, Kmart has a cafeteria? Well, they used to have a cafeteria, and that was my first job in the restaurant field. And that was frying chicken, cutting tomatoes. And I really just fell in love with not really food, because it really wasn't that wasn't food, what they served at Kmart. But I just fell in love with the people aspect of dealing with people, but I really loved getting on the microphone when we had the blue light special and just going crazy, and then I'd get in trouble. But anyway, so fell in love with that. My major in school was art, so I've always been kind of creative, and God has blessed me, the creativity and actually blessed me to talent as a musician. And then the restaurant business, I just kept going toward that. It wasn't the best business at the time, because you work late at night, you can get in trouble. There's a lot of potential for tragedy and misdirection, but I was pretty fortunate that I had a pretty strong base. So how I got to where we are today is I met my wife at Louie Louie's. If you remember Louie Louie's, it's gone now, but anyway, I met her there. It was kind of crazy. Funny story, we were married twice, and a lot of people don't know this, that she was working for U.S. Airways, and we could travel free when we got married. So I'm like, we got to get married really fast, because I want to travel. Never been out of Alabama, just about it. So we married first time, and she said, well, let's move in. I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. My mom will kill me. We need to get married first. And so we decided to get married first, and we did that in the eyes of God with our preacher. There were no certificates. We just did it because we felt it was right. And I was telling the story this weekend. I said, my mom, who's left us now, she knew everything. And we walked in, and she said, Keith? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, what did you do today? I'm like, I just went to Oak Mountain and we hiked. No, what did you do today? We went to Oak Mountain and hiked, Mom. What did you do today? I'm like, okay, we got married. So anyway, we got married. And with that came the free flight benefits, and the free flight benefits took us to Greece. And so my wife and I, we backpacked and traveled for 3 weeks and came back. And at that time, I had worked my way up from, my first wedding job was at, a lot of these places don't exist anymore. The Olive Garden in Eastwood Mall, I don't think it exists there anymore. But anyway, fell in love with a restaurant, worked my way in, got over to Southside into Bottega, started there in 1989 as a valet, which I loved valeting cars, because I could, sports cars. I didn't grow up driving sports cars. I grew up driving an OAMC Javelin, had to pull the string for the windshield wiper to work. But anyway, so I got behind these cars, and I'm like, this is a Porsche, and you buzz it around. You can only go like 15 feet fast, but they were all, it's a great car. So we were driving and then my manager came up and said, we got to pull you out of the valet line. I'm like, why is that? He said, you have like 10 tickets. And I'm like, dadgummit. I knew that was going to come out. So anyway, ended up going inside, working my way up to bartender, bar manager, and then the cafe manager. But during that time, so we went to Greece. Amy and I came back, and I said, I love the restaurant business. I want to do my own thing. And she said, that's a great idea, but we have no money to do that. And I was like, but I'm gonna find a way. So working at Bottega, you go through and you meet so many people, the bankers, lawyers, just everyone that's got money. And I said, I'm gonna go to the bank. I'm gonna put me a business plan together. I'm gonna go to the bank, and all I need is $50,000. And I still don't know where I got that number from. But I'm a guessing man. I said $50,000 is all I need. So because that's all you need. I'm like, I guess I don't know, but I'm gonna do it for $50,000. So we went and got denied. And it was just like, are you kidding me? My dream, I'm not going to give up. It's not an alternative. So I had a guy say, where do you live? I said, we have a small house in Homewood, which I'm throwing up inside now because we bought that house for $76,000, sold it for $123,000. So we had the money for the restaurant. Fast forward, a month ago, that same daggum house in Homewood on Broadway sold for like $500,000. I was in the wrong business. But anyway, got in the right business now. So anyway, he let us borrow the $50,000. And so we ended up going to restaurant auctions and sales. And I used my brother, my dad, my mom, my sister, any of my friends that wanted to help. We ended up building that restaurant for right at $50,000. And that was that was what we call T1's, our very first store, 1,100 square feet. And the first day we did, it was on a Saturday. We closed on Sunday, so we could go to church. We did 78 people, and we didn't look back. It was the next week. Again, all these things I talk about, they're not here anymore, and that's like the city scene. You remember the real paper that you get? So we were in the city scene, and they gave us like 4 stars, and I think Highlands and Bottega got 5, and we got 4. So the next week we were the line out the door, and Amy was still at U.S. Airways, and I said, we have a line out the door, and I don't have enough food to serve these people. I'm kind of freaking out here. I'm still going to let them in. So we ended up running out of food, and I ended up started making up stuff I didn't have any pita bread, so I used tortillas. I didn't have any lamb, so I used spinach. I didn't have any tomatoes, so I used hummus. So I just started making all this stuff up, and luckily, I called Amy's mom, who was the only one I could get to answer her phone. And I said, this ship is going down, and I'm really not sure what to do. So Amy rushed from U.S. Airways and came in and locked the front door, and there were about 70 people in there. I said, I don't think you should lock the front door. It's probably a fire code because I'm getting ready to burn this place down because I'm freaking out. There's too many people in here. So she gave out 50 menus, and it said, come back for a free dinner. And with her great personality and customer service, we got 49 of those back the next week. So then we opened, I know we're under time pressure, but Dave's not here, so it doesn't matter. So we opened our first store, happy, it went great, everything was smooth. We opened our second store in 2002, and Amy became pregnant with our first set of twins, which was good. And I said, this is great, we got set of twins. We got 2 stores. I can give one of them each a store when they grow up. We're done. And we decided that we want to go closer out toward Greystone. And so when we opened that store, Amy became pregnant with another set of twins. And she said, do you want to do another restaurant? I said, are you crazy? It seems like every time I open a restaurant, we have a set of twins, and I can't afford the 4 I've got. So we stopped then. Fast forward, I brought in some partners in 2008, and have grown it since then. Brought in some really cool franchisees, some nice people that understand our culture, our brand, my philosophy on business. So, like we said earlier, we're at 85 stores in 17 states, and it's one of those things that's unimaginable. I still slap my face, or Amy slaps my face every morning, and it's a dream come true. Yeah. So that's my story. Sorry.
Well, gentlemen, just thinking about your life and this idea of leadership and learning leadership, I'd love for you to talk. Was there a key mentoring influence in your life? Somebody that, and you talk a little bit about like in what ways they influenced you, whether it's personally or professionally. Just tell us a little bit about that. And Keith, you want to start with that?
Sure. I'd probably say the biggest person that influenced me, of course, was my father. Again, and it was that we talked about it at our meeting. It's about what he's done with our family is that he was the leader of our family. I mean, he was the one that made sure that we were going to church and made sure we understood. And my mom was more the how you treat people, but just having that leader in my household to direct us, because I had a crazy brother and we were running astray a lot of the times, and to keep us focused and in line. I think growing up, I called my dad as my mentor. He had no idea about the restaurant business, but he just kept me in line, and I think that was. And when I look and say, okay, how am I going to mentor my AGMs or my GMs that work for us, or just anyone in the office? I go back to, how did my dad mentor me? In the food business, I would say, I probably would say Rick, who I don't remember his last name, but who was my boss at Kmart, who kind of took me under his wing. I had really zero food interest or knowledge, but it was more about not so much food, it was about the personality and how to get along with others. It was a diverse group there at Kmart, but we had a good time. But then what brought me to the point today was probably the mentor was probably Frank Stitt, and that was not so much the mentor of do it this way as far as life and put God first. It was more about being passionate about asparagus, being passionate about potatoes. And it was like, when I first got the job there, it was fun. I was used to serving Olive Garden food where you just kind of heat it up and serve it. That's the truth. But Frank's passion was really about asparagus, and I'll never forget watching this man take 4 pieces of asparagus and put them on a plate. I'm like, this is hilarious. I mean, this guy, he's loving his asparagus. But it was the passion that he had for food that started sinking in to my little brain going, if you're going to do this, this is how you do this. So I guess I had the balance of both the mentorship from my father and then the example and I guess the way people build plates and are passionate about food.
Very good. Harry?
Yeah, well, as you know, I do a program called, it's called Today in Perspective. It's a 10-minute podcast on issues of the day from a Christian world and life view. I just finished a program on this young man in our city did you hear about it, that walked 20 miles to get to work that day, and I did a program out because there's about 5 things that come out in that story that are really affirming of a Christian world and life view. But one of the things that you heard him say, he said, well, this is what my father and mother taught me. And so while Rob was right to quote my book that said that you can learn leadership, I do believe you learn leadership, but I recognize it seems like certain families just keep producing leaders. But I think if you'll take a look at those families, there may be something in the DNA and genetic transfer, but I think it's mostly because there are families that have culture, a family culture that produces leaders. And so I'm like Keith. First thing I'd say is my father and my mother. But what I loved to hear was this guy say, my father and mother, and how important his father was in his life and also his mother. Same thing was true in my life. And they just created a culture. One of my the greatest things in my life was just to sit around listening to my daddy and granddaddy talk and tell stories and give insight. I mean, I still quote my dad to this day. The older I got, the smarter he got. And it was just, the older I got, the smarter he got. And I didn't realize just how many insights, but I never forget when I was 12, and formally I no longer had to eat at the kids' table. I could eat at the adult table. And then not only could I eat at the adult table, when it was over, I didn't have to leave the table. I could sit there and listen to the stories. And I can't tell you how much I've just learned from listening to them, and a phone call to ask my dad a question or my grandfather a question, and my mother, who was quite a leader in her own right. So that was number one. But I've done another book that's coming out in October called 3D Leadership, defining, developing, and deploying leaders. And in it, I talk about how I think every leader needs to have 3 to 5 models from history that you learn from, 3 to 5 mentors that you are being coached by, and then 3 to 5 motivators. In other words, a band of brothers, your peers that hang with you. I got 3 guys, we've been meeting together, holding each other accountable, our entire ministry together for 30 plus years now, and I don't know what I would have done without them. I had 3 to 5 mentors. One of them was the man I succeeded, Frank Barker. And I had 5 mentors in my life as a leader. And then I had 5 models that I selected from history. And I always encourage guys to get their models from history, because if you make somebody living your model, you really don't know how they're going to finish. And, the scripture says, that, Howard Hendricks makes a point that the Bible records 367 biographical sketches of leaders and believers that were leaders, and of those, only 49 finished strong. And so I like to get my models from history, guys that lived in difficult times, and then how did they finish, and try to learn from them. So that's what I encourage. You get some models to imitate, some mentors to coach you, and then to get some motivators, 3 to 5 around you that have got the green light to blow the whistle on you, throw the flag on you, and ask you the questions and pray for you. That's been helpful for me. My mentors, you guys are in the business world, and I'm in another world, and in a sense, but I get a chance to equip guys like you all the time. And but my mentors, who were RC, 2 of them are now with the Lord. I've got to replace them. R.C. Sproul and Jim Boyce were 2 of my mentors, and then Dr. Barker and Jim Baird and Al Martin and Henry Cravendam. And those guys, I would just say to them, can I say one other thing about this? I hear a lot of people say, Pastor, I can't get a mentor, and nobody comes and talks to me about. I said, look, mentors are not somebody that comes to mentor you. Mentors are somebody you look at and ask them to mentor you. I mean, just think how arrogant. What if I walked up to you and said, hi, I'm Harry Reeder, and I just want you to know I'm going to be your mentor. How arrogant can you get? And so I think if you're going to have a mentor, you got to go get them. And my guess is you're going to go to somebody that you respect, and that means other people have gone to them. So you need to make it as easy as possible for them. So I said to Dr. Barker years ago, I said, Dr. Barker, can I meet with you 2 times a year, and can I ask you 10 questions, and can I have your phone number, and I promise I won't call more than 4 times a year. And whatever you say to me will be treated confidential, but I would just really love to draw from you when I'm confronted with situations. And I did that with all of my mentors, and that's how it worked out in my life.
All right, now I know you guys are excited because you have expanded time, but it's moving quickly, so I'm going to hold you to like 2 minutes on this next question. All right, we often hear that truth is better caught than taught. I know that a lot of times there are just some real basic principles that kind of become guiding principles in your life or philosophy about business and the way you're living in the marketplace or in the ministry. So I guess I'd love for you guys to maybe just share 2, or even if you just really want to camp on 1, kind of maxims or short principles that have kind of guided and directed you in your work.
Who do you want to go first?
Keith.
Can I wait 30 seconds? I only got
Sure.
2 minutes. No, I'm kidding. I was going to take my time. So yeah, I was thinking about this. My mom at Fairview was in a class, and it was called the Joy class. And I always, saw J point, dot O, dot Y, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what that is growing up, but it was Jesus, others, and yourself. And I look at that in my life, and I thought, okay, how am I going to be a leader? These things I think you're taught to catch, but it takes time for you to really catch on as a person growing. And I try to live my life that way. Is that Jesus is first, and it's something I say. Jesus is first, others are next, and then yourself you're last. So when I go to mentor or to help some of our leaders in our business, I use that principle. It has made me a stronger leader because it's something I can always go back to. And if we don't do that, especially in the hospitality business, if we don't put others, Jesus is going to be first, but if we don't put others first, then we will fail in my business, we will fail. So that's one of the principles that I live on a daily basis is I've got to put Jesus first, others comes next, and then I hate to say it, but I'm last. And that's just that's the way I grow up. That's the way I work every day.
Harry?
Wow. It's just really hard for me to pick it, but it's kind of piggybacking and maybe a little bit of refinement of how it came to me. I had one of my mentors challenged me in this area, and it was, without the Lord, you can do nothing. And do you really believe that? And so, I mean, nothing that really counts for eternity. You can check the boxes, but you really don't make a difference until He makes you different. And so when I began to realize that, I realized, I am going to, and I kind of use that same principle that Keith is talking about, but I try to take it a step further under the guidance of my mentor, which was this. He said, Harry, he said, the Lord doesn't tell you to love Him with most of your heart. He says to love Him with all your heart. So I got an idea. Why don't you do it this way? Why don't you make the Lord your life and then let Him make the list of priorities for your life? And I said, that makes sense. And I'm somewhere between 0 and 100% effective on this. And but that became a kind of a principle at that point was, all right, the Lord's my life because without Him I can do nothing. But I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. So if I can stay focused, the more I stay focused and dependent upon Him. And that's, and in Him I can do what I do for the Lord. So that's been, and then the Lord makes my list, and then, and I know my list is my marriage, and then my kids, and then my ministry, and then my community. And so I try to work through that process and to try to maintain those priorities and realize what is it, and this is the other thing that came to me. I'll just briefly say this. I spent about 2 chapters on this in the book, but I moved from, I worked for UPS, which taught me efficiency, and that productivity was everything. And then I worked for McDonald's, and that's a real high class restaurant. And so and they taught us efficiency. But then I read about, hey, you can be the fastest ladder climber in the world, but if you got your ladder against the wrong wall, it's not doing you any good. So go to effectiveness. Efficiency is learning to do a lot of things well, but effectiveness is learning to do the right things. And so you've all seen the illustration. Put the big rocks in first. And so that's the way I've tried to plan my life and ask God for the wisdom from above to do that.
Well, building on something you said earlier, Harry, you were taking over for Frank Barker, and he was a beloved pastor, still is, and is still at Briarwood. And this is one of the reasons I was most inspired to have you on our panel, is the fact that that was an incredibly danger-fraught transition. And just the way that came about, I'd love to hear just a few things that you, coming into that situation, maybe some things that you consciously avoided, and then on the positive side, some things you intentionally did that helped to smooth the transition as you became the senior pastor?
Yeah, and you had mentioned that to me, and I want to say, and I'm going to try to say something that I know is kind of what you're aiming for me to talk about, but I really have to say this up front. Nobody takes over for Frank Barker, first of all. So when I came to succeed his leadership, I think one of the things I will ever be grateful for is God's patience with me, his presence with me as I stepped into something that was way beyond my abilities. But that was one of those things where I learned that you can do if he strengthens and gives you wisdom. So I want to give praise to the Lord for any blessing that has come in these last 20 years of following his 40-year ministry. And then secondly, I had just some wonderful leaders, elders, and staff that there's no way I could do what I do without them. And I remember in the 5th year, because we had to go through a lot of battles that the church was working through when I came. And I remember at the end of 5 years, I got this guy said, let's go talk. I want you to talk to the Boy Scout organization. I said, great. I said, where is it? And he said, it's at the club. And I said, the club? Man, what the Boy Scouts doing meeting at the club? But I went. Well, it was a ruse. And the guy said, he said, well, I had to ask the Lord to forgive me later. And so it was a ruse to get me there. And I walked in. There's about 200 men, elders and deacons from Briarwood. And it was 5 years and transition's over. Let's go take the world for Christ. And so I remember walking in, seeing all of those men after being there for 5 years and a big banner. And I remember thinking, this is either a celebration or it's my going away party. I'm not sure which it is. But anyway, so I'm very grateful for God's patience with me and the elders and deacons that I serve with, the team of leaders that I have a privilege to be a part of. But you know here's what I would tell you this very simply. I believe to succeed a successful leader and the other people know the person was a successful leader, is 2 traps you got to avoid. Number 1 is the trap to be more than he was because of your own desire for significance. In other words, that then puts people in a place to love you, they got to quit loving him. And my objective was that nobody, if you had to make a choice between me and Frank, you'd make the choice for Frank. And I didn't want anybody to have to choose to love Harry and follow his leadership. I have to quit loving Frank and move away from his leadership. I think that's a trap, and I think it's a death trap. Or the second thing is you're so intimidated by the person's success is that you try to be number 2, just a reproduction of that person instead of working with your own gifts and calling and strengths and weaknesses. And so you try to just be a replication of what went before you. So I think those are the 2 traps that you have to avoid. And to do that, what I like to do is to find as many things that are laudable, and there are a lot of them, that are laudable and honorable in the leader that I'm succeeding. I try to teach young men, find those things and what are laudable and honorable in the person that went before you, and then laud it and honor it. Just celebrate it. And that shouldn't intimidate you at all. That's just something you want to honor. So you try to create a way for them to appreciate and honor what's been done, and then say, now, not how do we replace what's been done, but how do we build on what's been done? Because the first thing that person would tell you if they could speak to you is that they didn't lead you to the pinnacle yet, they were leading you forward. So keep going forward. Now where do we go from here? And you start moving forward to the next level by building on what the person had done. Now there may be things that have to be undone, but those things can be done carefully and thoughtfully without demeaning those things that were honorable that had been done before. And so that's where you, again, there's one prayer I pray there's two prayers I pray before I get out of bed, before I even have my quiet time, before I get out of bed. I thank God that I'm saved, and I can't believe He allows me to do what I do. And then number two, and the people I get to do it with. And the second thing I say is, God, I really need a lot of wisdom today, because this is way beyond me. And so you have to get the wisdom to do that continually. So avoid those two traps. Honor what's been done, but don't try to just replicate it. Build on it into where it needs to go in the future.
Thank you. Keith, for you, I just looking on your website, and then when we talked, I loved how you elaborated on this Greek word that kind of captured your imagination, and probably butchered again here, but you said the Greeks call it evdaimonia.
Yes, you said it correct.
All right, excellent. Evdaimonia, so happiness. And just thinking from a Christian framework, it seemed as you kind of verbalized it was very similar to the Hebrew word shalom, this idea of not just peace or absence of war, but really the full abundance of human flourishing that God intended. And, as you talked about service, I'd love for you to just kind of share maybe how that has guided the way you have run your restaurants, expanded your restaurants, and even some of the initiatives that we talked about that maybe tried to be about more than just the bottom line in your business.
The word means to flourish, human flourishing. So when I look at that, I think, okay, how can I put in what I've learned through my mentorship from my father into our business? And, today, the restaurant business and the hospitality business is just so hard. So I think where we got a head start was making sure that our employees, that all of my employees were loved. And it was that passion that I had for each, and how, not only how am I going to succeed and make it, but how can I help others? And I think that was a challenge with, when we had the one store, is I can grow my team, but they're going to stop if I only have one store. I can keep growing internally and mentally and physically and spiritually, but there's going to be a point that they have to grow. So that was a task for me to say, okay, how do we grow this, the culture and my nourishment and my loving for the employees? Is that we've got to bring on more. We've got to bring on more disciples. We've got to bring on more employees. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's why we created T2, T3, T4. And then when I thought, well, this is kind of I think I've got a pretty good culture here, is that how can I create happiness for others? And it wasn't a selfish deal. It was, how do we grow the brand? And how do we do that, but still stay focused on the culture that we created 20 years ago, that I created probably when I was 6 years old, that my dad instilled in me. So something that we do is when we do a discovery day, and I was talking about with Tank back there, is that I've got to make sure that people are lined up in the same mindset that I have. And I want to make sure that when I bring these franchisees along on a discovery day, is that we mesh. I mean, we're partners, and again, some of these, our new franchisees are my mentors, and we learn from each other. But we've got to be on the same page. And that evdaimonia, meaning, and it was kind of funny, I was very fortunate enough to spend the last all of June in Greece, and I had my evdaimonia t-shirt, we call it eudaimonia, but evdaimonia, and I would ask a lot of our hosts in our house or just people on the street, what does this mean to you? Pronounce this and tell me what does this mean to you? And I got different answers, but they were all focused on happiness and growing. And one guy said, there's so much bad in the world today that evdaimonia is happiness, is you're away from the mean people. His English was broken, and he said, you're away from the mean people. There's too many mean people. Evdaimonia is happiness. So I think and even today with our society, is that it's a challenge for me to make sure that I can continually and keep growing our staff And I miss. We all make mistakes, but is how do I continue growing and nurturing and creating what God has given me? And it's hard. It is so hard today.
Well, Keith, I was really encouraged by like your Hope program, how you're intentionally, helping create industry for handicapped people who are able to, grow gardens of cilantro and other herbs so that they can work and find meaning. And that really kind of tees up our kind of final question here for both of you. It's a core conviction at YBL that we believe that God created us to fulfill what we'll call the Great Commission, Matthew 28:20, where Jesus says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. I see that as a restatement of Genesis chapter 1, where God created us to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it under His wise direction and order. So with that in mind, one of the key things is we believe that work and vocation is absolutely, you're in your sweet spot when you go to work. You don't go to work so that you can do ministry later. Your work can be your ministry. So I would just love, sorry to handicap you here, but with maybe a minute or so each to just kind of say how you kind of pursue that in your work.
I'll go quickly and let Harry wrap up. Our thing is not only leadership is the challenge that we had opening the first store was how are we gonna give back to the community and to show people who we really are, not just we're in this business to make money. Is it how do we give back? And I think that at the very beginning, we didn't have money to give charities or to give churches or schools, but we had our time and I would give them food. And I think to me, and we do it every single, I've got a email the other day from 6, and one of them was Briarwood, which we love and we help. 6 different organizations that want stuff. And it's like, and I check the box on all of them. Because that's a part of our culture and a part of our brand is that God has blessed me. You have to give back, and it goes back to the Hope Project, that in the hiring of special needs, is that God has blessed us in our business, and it's just a small token of how we're going to repay. And and I've said it a million times, that's what you, as a Christian, that's how you have to live, and that's what you have to do, is you have to give it back and educate.
Yeah, I think I would leave it with this then, Rob, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. And guys, it's great to be with y'all. I just want you to know if there's anything I can ever do for you, I would never intrude on the relationship you would have with your own pastor, but please feel free to call on me. As I said, I got some great guys around me, so I get a little free time to be able to respond. And so feel free to call on me if there's anything I can do to help you. And that's because I think the test of a leader is not the size of their following, but the quality and quantity of leaders you develop and leave behind you. When the Apostle Paul went to be with the Lord, there's Timothy, Titus, leading women, Aquila, Priscilla. When Moses finished up, there's Joshua, there's Caleb. Jesus had invested in the 70, the 12, and the 3. So I think that you're always intentionally reproducing yourself. I think great leaders know their mission and they're unalterably committed to achieving it. Secondly, they take care of their people. And thirdly, they're always reproducing themselves intentionally. And so so one of the ways that I would encourage you to do that is to develop not a leadership team. Early on, I said, I'm going to get a leadership team. And that's what I did. I came to the conviction that you don't develop leadership teams, you develop teams of leaders. And that's what you want to do. A leadership team usually ends up serving the leader. But if you got a team of leaders, you'll end up serving. My guess is if I walked into Keith's operation and looked long enough, I'd find a lot of leaders that he is making successful. And so that's what I see great leaders do. You develop teams of leaders. And then, of course, y'all know I'm going to end up here, and that's this. All this is really just blowing in the wind without a relationship with Christ. And I want to make sure you've got that. I know every single one of you guys know you're going to die, and I know you're going to die because my guess is if I looked at your portfolio, you'd have an insurance policy. Well, I'd want to know do you have an assurance policy? And one of the reasons the Bible was written is so that you can have that assurance. These things have I written to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you might know that you have eternal life. And that's the foundation stone and the cornerstone to build. Don't make Christ a stumbling stone. Make him the foundation stone in your life, your marriage, and your family. And then watch him do some things in you that you can't believe what he is doing, and let him get all the glory for it.
Well, let me close this with just a short word of prayer, and then we'll dismiss. Father, I thank you for these men, and for, just as Pastor Reeder shared, that God, all of them that you have put around us, God, that you have served us even through the hands of others, God, that you are so good to us. We want to honor you, and we want to recognize you. We want to thank you for not only creating us, but creating us with a purpose. We pray that we would discover the purpose for which you've created us, and that we would be able to rejoice in our work, and that we would be able to learn leadership and to build leaders in our lives. We pray this not because of who we are, Father, but because of who you are and because of your plan. We pray that you would bless this day as each one goes to work. God, please strengthen our hands for the work you've given us to do. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, gentlemen.